if I could choose, I should also say, although the president of the Academy left, that I'm pleased to be here in the Academy of Science because I was advisor on this issue to the National Academy of Science in Washington, where I was invited by the president of the Academy of Science to advise him and a group in 1970s. I was a graduate student at Harvard on these matters. So this is not a new subject. Not only it's not a new subject, as the president says, it's a very old subject. In 1967, the Bishop Spratt wrote the History of the Royal Society, which was meant to legitimate the scientific enterprise of the Royal Society. Condorcet in the French Revolution issued a program for public instruction because he understood what is the French Revolution? It's the government of the people. If the people is not knowledgeable, how can they self-govern? And the same thing can be said about Joseph Priestley, who was the great defenders of the American and the French revolutions. So if there is a motto for my presentation, I would say this: if knowledge is power, knowledgeable citizens have more power vis-à-vis their government than ignorant citizens. And I would like to stress in my work, in my short presentation, we have very limited time, the issue of democracy and science. But before, I want to say that I concur with Professor Loewenstein, as I said, that I think through every element of these four models is important in the general picture, although the deficit model is based on an anachronistic view of the relation between science and politics. And I think also that the engagement model is indeed what's happening now, and it's very important. And I agree with you also that this process is inescapably or unescapably political. There is the illusion of the escape from politics to science is now very well known. So I'll try to show in a few minutes that the problem in Israel, and this will come at the end of these few comments I will make, is not in communicating knowledge so much, not in the availability of knowledge, but of public indifference to the consumption of scientific knowledge. And this has almost nothing to do with science, and I'll explain why. I'm trying to say that for science to play a role in democracy, we need democracy. We need democratic citizens with democratic consciousness, with the notion that you are self-governing people, and that the political government is basically your clerks. They carry your power as a people on trust. But unfortunately, our political culture is not only profoundly not democratic. Even this morning was a whole discussion. Why in Europe there is such a protest against raising prices and against all kinds of mischiefs done by their governments, and our public is so docile and passive? I think this is the greatest achievement of the Israeli educational system, to repress the consciousness of citizenship and active public involvement and engagement in policy making. It is an achievement that should not be underestimated. I will deal with three short things. First of all, what was the original vision of the partnership of science and democracy? What's the nature of its decline since the 70s? And what is the current state, especially in Israel? It's not a coincidence that the 17th, 19th century, especially 18th century, were called the Age of Reason. At that time, they thought that both politics and science are there to merge and converge in creating a new form of politics, and a new form of citizens self-governing by knowledge. People like Immanuel Kant, Marquis Condorcet that I mentioned, Thomas Paine, you remember also, especially those who are old here, Thomas Jefferson, they all believed that government should be transparent to knowledgeable public, and that is the only core of democracy. Otherwise, we have a hierarchy again, which is not actually accountable. So that's why there was such a movement to create encyclopedias, science museums, public instructions, universal education. Remember, the Israeli government cuts the budgets of education? Remember, the Israeli educational system is one of the most retarded in Western democracies? It's not a coincidence. More knowledgeable and critical public is more powerful public vis-à-vis the government. No government liked it. But if there is a strong commitment to democratic culture, then education is forced on the political elite, and they cannot be escaped from cutting in this. And I'll talk about it. I will return to it in one sentence in a minute. So, what I want to say is that, of course, there was a great illusion in the beginning that scientific knowledge is inherently public knowledge. It is public not in the popular sense, but in the sense that every educated person, and especially highly educated person, can have access to this knowledge. But it's not it's not public knowledge in the popular sense. Nevertheless, the idea of Newton, and especially scientific empiricism, the movement from deductive to more inductive sciences, and the kind of things that Joseph Priestley and others have done, have actually created a popular vision of science as something based on experience, which to some extent is true. One of the great historians of science, Professor Stephen Shapin, my friend, has written extensively on this subject. So what happened? Even though science was not inherently public knowledge, it was clear that the public can know enough in order to influence public policy. What happened in the last, say, 60, 70 years is that the social authority of science has been drastically diminishing in many democracies due to major ongoing scientific controversies. Actually, this was the price of relevance. The more science became relevant and perceived as relevant to public policy, the more it was engaged in political controversies, because public policy is a contested process. So what happened is that we had a situation where scientists, or the authority of scientists, became a political resource of authority for politicians to legitimate unpopular decisions. And scientists, where there always found scientists who will take the position of this group, and always there were scientists who could be found to take the position of the other group. So scientists became like lawyers, advocates of partisan positions. And this is the moment to mention the great man. He was a great man, even though he was not Jewish. Galileo. No evidence so far that he was Jewish.
His grandmother.
Maybe
his grandmother.
Maybe his grandmother. I mean, we still, you know, I'm sure there are projects here about our traditions that come from Sa'ar that might discover at the end that something like this. And what did he say in his letter? He wrote a letter to the Duchess Christina that explained his position vis-a-vis the demand of the church, that he defines his position vis-a-vis Copernicus as hypothesis because it undermines the authority of the Pope. You know what he said there? Lady, I'm not a lawyer. I'm governed by knowledge, by mathematical formulations. I cannot change my mind one day by this client and the other one. But unfortunately, this in some sense happened precisely in the places where the professional associations of physicists, of statisticians, of biologists lost much of their power to control their peers. So we have controversies about nuclear energy, environment, economic policies. Remember September 2008. IQ genetics, the relation between IQ genetics, food additives, all these things. And Professor Jazanov, that was in some way is a colleague of us and a teacher and so on, she, in a marvelous book, demonstrated some years ago what you said, Bruce, that scientific controversies take a different shape in each country. In Germany, for example, the whole discussion about biologically modified organisms, which was a very hot issue, was colored by the memory of Nazis and Nazi biology. In England, that was not the issue. In England, it was much more empirically oriented. So that this is very important for people like the community sits here, which I'm so happy to see. Community of scientific affairs community is called it one of my teachers, Professor Don K. Price, who wrote perhaps the first leading book on science and government, a professor at Harvard. He called your group that mediates between science and the public the scientific affairs community. And I learned from him to lend a great deal of importance to this group because as mediators, you really carry much of the burden of dealing with these problems. And when we talk about the localization of the relation between science and politics, it becomes a highly specialized thing, specialized in the terms of the areas of knowledge and specialized in the terms of the areas of public policy and societies. Now, science also suffered from the fact that sociologists and philosophers of science began to start looking more closely about how science is being made. So the public didn't quite understand the discussion that came out of it and that actually misunderstood it to mean that science is a very relative enterprise. Such thinkers as Bruno Latour and even Stephen Shapin show that, that the scientists in the laboratory or in their theoretical work actually experience instability of scientific definitions of facts, unresolved theoretical disagreements, and inherent uncertainties in scientific conceptions of causality. This is true, part of the work of scientists, but when it kind of trickled, then the gentleman give him the time to sit quietly. And when this knowledge about the complexities of this process of producing knowledge was trickling down into the public, it affected their perception of science. Turned out that science is not something that can give automatic, absolute, certain answers to any social problem. The other things that contributed to the decline of the social authority of science was, of course, the decline of the faith in general progress. General progress was replaced by suspicion, ambivalence in sometimes very antagonistic local interests about science. So we had this kind of development in science. So what is the situation in Israel today? So as I said, the most acute problem is not from the side of science, but from the side of our democracy. The main problem in Israel is the not communicating knowledge, but consuming knowledge, both at the top level of public policy, remember Vinograd, and the general public. There is a weak demand for scientific knowledge as a way to empower your own individual judgment as a democratic citizen. We see ourselves more as clients of the states than as the sovereign. To change our position is a matter of consciousness revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, your role will be magnified by several 100,000 kilometers, by manifold, if that democratic education will begin to penetrate our educational system. You know, there are certain sectors of our educational systems that are completely free from this, and others, Shurei Ezrachut, are very, very poor. This is in the Israeli elementary school and high schools are notoriously retarded educational system by international standards. Now, if this is not enough, we have a record of drastic, unforgivable series of cuts in budgets for higher education. There's been some attempts to try to correct it, but not much. And as I said, because knowledge is power for the citizen, I'm not sure the government has a natural inclination to strengthen the public by knowledge. Most importantly, civic education in Israel is almost nil. What is stressed instead is attachment to national traditions in religion and culture. But ethnic loyalty is not a substitute for education for engaged critical citizenship. It doesn't contradict it, but it's not a substitute. So the idea that I read in the paper to change and to diminish and to shrink courses in citizenship and put instead more Yiddishkeit, Jewishkeit, whatever you call it, I think this is a disaster for you and for the country. And I think government decision-making also is neither consistent nor transparent. Regulation, as we know, is weak. So this is a kind of a Cassandra speech, and I'm about to finish. I have 1.5 sentences. As professionals in the field of science communication to the public, I think you should note that you have a much greater role than you might think, that you can encourage the public with whom you are in contact to recognize that science is not just important to know what will happen to them, but also is a matter essential to their autonomy as individuals, as human beings who are a source of authority in a democracy. And without this, they are much more likely to be subject to government rather than to participate in the government. So what I want to say is, even though I sound very pessimistic, I'm uncontrollable optimist. I believe that we certainly will not be able to continue in the present trends, and that the engagement of the Israeli public will increase. I see some signs of it in mass communication. I want to mention especially now active public communicator who has turned her arena into a major field for provoking the public to take initiatives. This is Karen Neubach in the radio. I think she is a model communicator of knowledge and citizenship, and the more there will be like her, I'm not sure. I hope she will stay, not like Shelley Yachimowicz will go to the Knesset. But the more there'll be like her, the better for all of us. Thank you.